Clark Ashton Smith, best known for his fantasy and science fiction stories, was primarily a poet. His first literary efforts were in this field, and I sensed his conviction that any lasting reputation he might attain would depend on the merits of his poetry. I am Robert Elder, like Clark, a lifelong resident of Auburn, California, and it was my privilege to know him during his later years. He was about 25 years my senior, and was well into middle life before I became acquainted with him. Clark was a familiar figure in Auburn, then a small town of about 3,000 population. Although most people were aware of him, only a few could claim to know him well. I remember the first time I ever spoke to him was on the occasion of his marriage. As a reporter for the local newspaper, the Auburn Journal, I learned of Clark's intended wedding, and I stopped at the office of the Justice of the Peace to cover the story. I chatted with him briefly after the ceremony and met his bride, the former Carol Dorman of San Francisco. This short encounter was scarcely an introduction, so I was surprised a few months later to receive a note from Clark inviting me to dinner at his home. The invitation puzzled me because Clark was not a person given to entertaining, and I could not imagine what he wanted with me. I also felt a little trepidation in that he had the reputation of being a remote, unapproachable person, and I did not know what we should talk about. But my curiosity overcame my fears, and I showed up at the Smith home, a rustic house in a wooded area south of town, where Clark had spent his life. I was welcomed by the couple, and while his wife prepared dinner, Clark and I retired to his den, where I learned what the occasion was all about. Some time before, I had written a novel entitled Whom the Gods Destroy, about a man who was out of sympathy with the events of his day. Clark liked the book, even finding some traits in the leading character which he identified with himself, and he wished to discuss the story with me. I was pleased that a man of Clark's literary reputation should be impressed with my work. Far from being unapproachable, Clark appeared friendly and interesting to me, and as we launched into a discussion of our literary tastes and aims, all constraint vanished, and we began a friendship that lasted during the remaining years of his life. Since their marriage, the Smiths had spent part of their time at Pacific Grove on the Monterey Peninsula. It was during one of their frequent visits back to Auburn that we decided to record Clark on tape. I think the idea was mine, since I had a new tape recorder I wanted to use, and his wife may have had something to do with it, as she had been giving Clark elocution lessons to help him with the occasional public readings he gave of his works. The poems were chosen at random, mostly by me, from a couple of his books, The Dark Chateau and Spells and Filters. Sometimes I am asked if Clark had a favorite among his works. If so, he did not reveal it to me, and I recall a few of his remarks regarding some of the poems we recorded. The poem The Tired Gardener expressed Clark's marked preference for the wild gardens of nature over cultivated gardens. His own yard showed no sign of cultivation, but was left entirely natural. When I chose the poem Don Quixote on Market Street, I remember him saying with satisfaction, "That is one I like." And he confided to me that the poem Nada was inspired by a macabre painting